Well, g'day again. Ross Thatcher back here again with the third part reading of the book Secret of the Ages by Brinsley Le Poet-Trench. While I was reading the second part last time around, my phone did run out of battery, and so it somewhere cut out. I'm not even sure how far it went because I haven't actually listened all the way to the end, but I'm assuming where I've left it here on chapter 24. Perhaps I will go back at chapter. Why not? Let's start at chapter 23. They knew too much, just to refresh us to what we were up to. Because I think I saw the name Bender in there. You know, bending robots are pretty cool. And, you know, I'm not into the UFO conspiracies. I don't believe aliens exist. Well, not necessarily as I used to think, as little green men from Mars or anything like that. But if aliens do exist, it's quite possible. My two thoughts, just quickly, before I get started, is maybe they're us from the future and they've time travelled back because they've developed the technology, and what they evolved into, or devolved into, they're not real satisfied with, and so they're coming back to try and learn where they went wrong. One theory. Other one is, of course, well, if there's more land beyond Antarctica, well, it's quite logical that it's probably where they come from. They could come from deep inside the Earth, as this book often says. And without further ado, chapter 23 says they knew too much. One of the stranger aspects of the flying saucer phenomena is the silencing of well-known ufologists by the mysterious Men in Black. The first known Man in Black case in modern times was the Maury Island affair in 1947. The late Edward J. Ruppelt, former head of the United States Air Force Project Blue Book, stated in his book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, that the two principals in the case, Harold A. Dahl and Fred L. Chrisman, had confessed to perpetrating a hoax. The result was that the Air Force took no further interest in the matter. The only people hoaxed were the Air Force, including two military intelligence officers who lost their lives on the way back from Tacoma to California. Let us recapitulate what happened at Lonely Maury Island on 21st of June 1947, 3 days before Kenneth Arnold's sighting, which triggered off press publicity in a big way for flying saucers. Harold A. Dahl, a harbour patrolman, was out in his boat on the east bay of Maury Island near Tacoma, state of Washington, with a crew of 2 men and his son. Dahl's dog was also in the boat. Suddenly, Dahl, who was at the wheel, noticed 6 very large donut-shaped aircraft. I would judge they were about 2,000 feet above water and almost directly overhead. At first glance, I thought them to be balloons, as they seemed to be stationary. However, upon further observation, 5 of these strange aircraft were circling very slowly around the 6th one, which was stationary in the centre of the formation. It appeared to me that the centre aircraft was in some kind of trouble, as it was losing altitude fairly rapidly. The other aircraft stayed at a distance of about 200 feet above the centre one, as if they were following the centre one down. The centre aircraft came to rest almost directly overhead at about 500 feet above the water. All on board our boat were watching these aircraft with a great deal of interest, as they apparently had no motors, propellers, or any visible signs of propulsion, and to the best of our hearing they made no sound. In describing the aircraft, I would say they were at least 100 feet in diameter. Each had a hole in the centre, approximately 25 feet in diameter. They were all sort of shell-like gold and silver colour. Their surface seemed of metal and appeared to be bowled, because when the light shone on them through the clouds they were brilliant. Not all one brilliance, but many brilliances, something like a Buick dashboard. Dahl had managed to manoeuvre his boat close into the shore. He was able to take some photographs of the objects. Suddenly there was a dull boom, and the centre object disgorged a large quantity of white, light metal pieces. This was followed by what seemed to Dahl and his companions a hail of blacker metal, which had a similar appearance to lava rock. Dahl's son had his arm injured by one of the falling fragments, and another piece killed his dog. The pieces appeared to be hot, for when they hit the bay, steam rose from the water. When this extraordinary deluge of metal ceased, all 6 of the aircraft rose and drifted out to sea. The centre object, which had dropped the metal, did not seem in any way disturbed and remained in the centre as the group moved away. Dahl stated that his boat had been damaged by the falling fragments. The crew managed to return into Tacoma, where Dahl reported the incident to Fred L. Chisman, his immediate chief. The latter thought Dahl and the others had been on a drinking spree. He did not at first believe their story. However, Dale gave Chrisman his camera with its load of film and some of the pieces of metal as proof. According to Dale, the film from our camera developed showed these strange aircraft, but the negatives were covered with spots similar to a negative that has been close to an X-ray room before it has been exposed, except that the spots printed white instead of black, as is the usual case. Early in the next morning, something strange happened to Dale. One of those rather frightening things that seem to come the way of people who know too much about certain aspects of flying saucers. A man, dressed in black, called at his home and invited him out to breakfast. Dale was used to lumber buyers calling on him early and at first thought there was nothing unusual about his visitor. That is, until over the breakfast table, the man described in full detail everything that had occurred to Dale and his crew the day before. It was quite uncanny. The man in black told Dale that if he valued his own welfare and that of his family, he should not discuss his experiences with anyone. Earlier that morning, Chrisman went over to Maury Island and found all the debris exactly as Dale had reported. Then, according to Chrisman, while I stood looking at the fragments holding a few pieces in my hand, one of the same kind of aircraft that Howard described to me came right out of a large fat cumulus cloud and made a wide circle of the little bay. All these events were related to Kenneth Arnold, the man who saw 9 gleaming objects flying near Mount Rainier, state of Washington, 3 days after Dale's encounter with 6 donut-shaped ones at Maury Island. Arnold had flown to Tacoma to investigate the affair at the request of Ray Palmer. He sent for Captain E.J. Smith, a United Airlines pilot, to come and join him. Captain Smith had also seen a gaggle of saucers from his airliner soon after Arnold's own sighting. The 2 pilots continued the investigation together from the Winthrop Hotel in Tacoma. After a while, they decided to bring in 2 intelligence officers from Hamilton Air Force Base, Captain William Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown. Both Arnold and Smith had been interrogated by these officers after their own sightings and had a regard for their capabilities. Dale and Chrisman were both agreeable to this step, but the strange affair took on a new slant when the intelligence officers arrived at the Winthrop Hotel. Dale and Chrisman gave the impression of making the whole business appear a hoax. Davidson and Brown suddenly threw in their hands and decided to fly back to California in their B-25 bomber. Just before the 2 officers left, Chrisman drove up in a great hurry with a load of fragments. These were transferred to the intelligence officer's vehicle and went with them to be eventually loaded onto the bomber. Half an hour after takeoff, the B-25 crashed near Kelso, Washington. Davidson and Brown were both killed. Subsequently, another intelligence officer, Major Sunders, interviewed both Arnold and Smith in Tacoma. Later, he took them both in his car to the beach at Maury Island and pronounced the fragments alleged to have fallen there as nothing but ordinary slag. Nevertheless, he made sure of taking away from all the pieces that Arnold had at the hotel for analysis. Those are the main facts of this fantastic case. Let us look at 1 or 2 points. First, Dale's description of the objects as aircraft. This should be borne in mind and is a factor in Dale's favour. The second point is that he described the objects as donut-shaped. Now this is very important, and it is on this description that possibly the whole matter hinges. Neither Arnold nor Smith described their objects as donut-shaped. They were discs, though I understand that Arnold's were more crescent-shaped. Since 1947, the bulk of the sightings have been disc or saucer-shaped objects, although there have been plenty of other shapes thrown in for good measure: triangular, star, oval, tadpole, delta, and cigar-shaped, among others. Donut-shaped objects have been rare, but they have been seen and photographed. The point is that from Arnold's sighting onward for a very long time, those who reported seeing what are termed flying saucers did not report donut-shaped ones. Therefore, if Dale and Chrisman were concocting a hoax, quite apart from subsequently making it appear to be one, why did they pick on donuts? If you or I were going to perpetrate a flying saucer hoax at that time, and the time is so important, would we pick on such a shape? It is to be doubted. Furthermore, if you or I did, by such long odds, pick on donuts for our hoax on 21st of June 1947, we would think it incredible that a donut-shaped UFO was photographed over New York City almost 8 years later and was identical in size and characteristics. On Sunday, 15th of May 1955, Warren Sigmund saw for a period of about 1 minute and a half an unidentified flying object over Union Square, New York City. This important sighting was fully described in Flying Saucer Review. It was a beautiful day, and so, quite naturally, Mr. Sigmund was taking some pictures on the roof of the office building with a reflex-type camera of Miss Janine Boulier, who worked for the French government tourist office. Suddenly, Miss Boulier pointed up at the sky behind her friend, exclaiming, "Quick, take a look at that." Mr. Sigmund turned and looked in the direction she had indicated. He saw an enormous circular object radiating like an immense ball of fire. Sigmund said that he had never seen anything like it before in his life. It was a tremendous size. He started taking pictures. The object had no wings, no tail, and no markings, and made no sound. It didn't seem to know what gravity was. If it did know, it certainly wasn't respecting it, Sigmund declared. He managed to get several photographs of the object, one of which clearly showed its donut shape. The World Telegram broke the news of this sighting with a big front page story. The telephoto service of the United Press sent the photographs to every part of the world. Mr. Sigmund showed the pictures to the United States Air Force Office of Special Investigations. They examined the negatives and agreed that he had seen something. Another extremely well authenticated sighting of a donut-shaped object occurred on 21st of September 1961. Two Boeing 707s encountered a large UFO over the Pacific. One was a BOAC aircraft with Captain R.F. Griffin in command, and the other was a Pan American airliner. Both captains radioed to FAA towers at Wake Island and Honolulu reports on the enormous objects they had seen. Captain Griffin's BOAC airliner was flying at 37,000 feet when the UFO showed up. Suddenly we saw this bright ring in the sky about 50 degrees up. He described the object as round with clearly defined edges and pointed out that it had a very clear hole in the centre. The Pan American skipper confirmed Captain Griffin's report. Captain Griffin added that the UFO was travelling in their direction but at a much greater speed and that it went over the horizon in 7 minutes. The object must have been enormous to have been seen in such detail at such an altitude. Surely these two remarkable sightings of donut-shaped UFOs over New York in 1955 and over the Pacific in 1961 go a long way to establishing that the Maury Island affair was no hoax. The all-important question is repeated. If Dahl was carrying out a hoax, is it likely that he would have picked on donut-shaped saucers at the time? Remember, flying saucers were only just beginning to get publicity and no donut ones had been seen prior to Dahl's sighting. Incidentally, another point that may not have impressed the intelligence officers was the dropping of the slag from the Santa craft. This may have stretched their credulity over much. In 1947, it was not known that UFOs are in the habit of dropping earthly substances on the surface of our planet. Times have changed. This is something that's been learnt over the years. The fact that slag was alleged to have been dropped from the Santa UFO is probably an insult to the intelligence of the two officers. In 1947, if you were going to perpetrate a hoax connected with flying saucers, slag would have been the last thing to include in your plans. Therefore, the dropping of the slag, in the light of what is known now, is another very important factor in favour of Dahl and Grisman. The Maury Island affair was no hoax. The intriguing question as to why Dahl and Grisman, when confronted with Davidson and Brown, appeared to make the whole affair at Maury Island out to be a hoax is, indeed, quite another matter. Maybe the gentleman in a black suit who invited Dahl out to breakfast can answer that one. Can we assume for a moment that a hollow earth exists and that people do live inside it? If we can do just that, a lot of very important events that have occurred in the past 25 years or more fit into place. Veteran ufologists will recall the sensational closing down of Albert K. Bender's International Flying Saucer Bureau back in 1953. At that time, Bender had quite a large international movement. He'd been in close touch with Edgar Jarrell, another ufologist who headed the Australian Flying Saucer Bureau, and they'd been working together on a theory linking the UFOs with Antarctica. Mr. Bender had written an article for publication in his magazine which divulged the secret of the saucers. That article was never published. 3 men in black visited Bender at his home. They so frightened Bender that for a long time he gave up all UFO research. This incident has been fully described by Gray Barker in his book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. Bender's colleagues questioned him afterwards for some time, and with his permission tape recorded his answers. One of the questions put to him was, "How did you find out about it? Can't you just tell me where you got your theory?" Bender's answer was, "All I can say is this. It was something that I was thinking about for a long time. I went into the fantastic and came up with the answer." Now that answer is very significant. An extraterrestrial origin for the saucers would not be in the fantastic for a UFO researcher. What would be in the realm of the fantastic would be an inner Earth concept. If it is also noted that both Bender and Jarrell were working on a theory to do with Antarctica, you will get my message. If it can be tentatively accepted that such an inner world exists, and proof has been presented in the second part of this book, and that the occupants have use of fantastic machines, as well as extrasensory powers, then it is too easy for them to frighten people into silence. If they look like us to a great extent, then they will probably have their representatives here on the surface who may be the men in black. Living just below us inside the Earth with all their wonderful machines and advanced knowledge, it will be only too easy for them to monitor our languages, and they probably know far more about us than we do ourselves. Therefore, as I've just written, it would be easy to frighten people into silence if they wanted to do so. After all, ufologists have wives and families, and how many police officers are going to believe statements that UFO researchers are being threatened by denizens of the inner world? In any case, the police have a full-time job coping with crimes committed by members of another underworld. Consider the case of the late Dr. Morris J. Jessup, a professional astronomer. He was also a prominent ufologist and wrote several fine books on the subject. Jessup believed that the majority of the UFOs emanated from what he called the binary Earth-Moon system. He considered the UFOs came from installations inside the interior of the Moon and from inside the Earth, and that they had bases in the oceans too. I think that this latter point is also very valid. In the introduction to this book, I referred to the work of the late Ivan T. Sanderson called Invisible Residents. He produced a massive evidence pointing to the fact that many of the UFOs had been seen to dive in and out of the oceans, and postulated that they probably had bases there. As I write these words, I'm thinking of several American newspaper cuttings that have landed up on my desk from correspondents in the United States in the last few days. One of those periodical UFO flaps is in the progress, but several of the news stories relate to something that would have been right up Sanderson's street if he had been still with us today. We sorely miss him, a very fine man. Here is the account straight from the Boston Herald American, dated 13th of October 1973. There were these strange creatures. Pascagoula, Mississippi. Not Massachusetts. Pascagoula, Miss, UP. Two shipyard workers who claimed they were hauled aboard a UFO and examined by silvery-skinned creatures with big eyes and pointed ears were checked at a military hospital yesterday and found to be clear of radiation. Air Force doctors at nearby Keesler Air Force Base examined the men, Charles Hickson, 42, and Calvin Parker, 19, as a precautionary measure after they came forth with their weird tale. Officials said the men, both employed at Walker Shipyards, where Hickson is a foreman, would make no further public statements concerning their story until they talked further with federal authorities. Jackson County Chief Deputy Barney Mathis said the men told him they were fishing from an old pier on the west bank of Pascagoula River about 7 p.m. Thursday when they noticed a strange craft about 2 miles away emitting a bluish haze. They said it moved closer and then appeared to hover about 3 or 4 feet above the water. Then 3, whatever they were, came out, either floating or walking, and carried us into the ship, officers quoted Hickson as saying. The things had big eyes. They kept us about 20 minutes, photographed us, and then took us back to the pier. The only sound they made was a buzzing, humming sound. They left in a flash. These are reliable people, Sheriff Fred Diamond said. They had no reason to say this if it had not been true. I know something did happen to them. The sheriff said the spacecraft was described as fish-shaped, about 10 feet square with an 8 feet ceiling. The occupants were said to have pale silvery grey skin, no hair, long pointed ears and noses with an opening for a mouth and hands like crab claws. Subsequently, the two men were interviewed by Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who is a professor of astronomy at Northwestern University and was civilian consultant to the former US Air Force Project Blue Book investigating UFOs, and also by Dr. Harder of California. Hynek stated after examining the men under hypnosis that he found them telling the truth beyond a reasonable doubt. It seems more than likely that there are some UFOs that have bases under the seas, as both Sanderson and Jessup thought. On 20th of April 1959, Dr. Morris K. Jessup was found dead. He had apparently committed suicide by inhaling carbon monoxide, presumably by connecting a hose to the exhaust of his station wagon and introducing it inside the vehicle. Did Jessup know too much? A very prominent scientist and leading ufologist was the late Dr. James E. McDonald, Senior Physicist, Institute of Atmospheric Physics and Professor, Department of Meteorology, University of Arizona. Dr. McDonald became a very outstanding speaker and writer on UFOs and was very critical of the US Air Force's handling of the UFO situation. Keel wrote that Dr. McDonald privately discussed in his last years the possibility that alien beings were not only present on this planet but were systematically taking over top posts in the government and military. On 13th of June 1971, his body was found in the desert north of Tucson, Arizona. He too had apparently done away with himself. Did McDonald know too much? Then there was the case of Professor Rene Hardy. He was a scientist of world repute, a prodigious inventor with over 250 patents in his name in the fields of electronics, radio, television, ultrasonics, and optics. He was interested in ufology, parapsychology, and interstellar navigation, among many other subjects. On 12th of June 1972, the professor was found dead with a bullet in his head and a revolver in his hand, just 2 days before he was to announce a highly important discovery concerning space phenomena. There was no reason for his apparent suicide. There followed a most extraordinary and significant happening. At the funeral of Professor Hardy, there were 6 tall men that no one knew, and although photographs were taken of all present, those 6 men did not appear in the printed photographs. The suicides of Jessup, MacDonald and Hardy may all have been perfectly genuine ones for personal reasons. However, it is certainly strange that 3 people, all of whom have been playing a leading part in ufology, should have left us in this most unfortunate manner. It would seem that they knew too much about flying saucers, with apologies to Grady Barker. So chapter 24 is Humming Sounds from Underground. I'm going to have to extract an opener and open something which I hope doesn't fizz up too much, which it probably will, hence why I prepared a glass earlier. Cheers to beers. Not bad if I say so myself. It's a lighter beer, this one. So during the past 2 decades, strange humming noises, which seem to those who have heard them to be coming from underground, have been reported from different parts of the country. These unexplained noises were heard about 20 years ago at Leigh-on-Sea, Essex, and also at Chalfont, St Giles in Buckinghamshire. In more recent years, the humming has been heard in the London area, down in Kent, and in Bournemouth. The persistent humming at Chalfont, St Giles began in September 1953, but by the end of the year, the noise, which had a deep vibration, was becoming very loud. Some people were unable to get any sleep and lay awake listening to the constant humming, which at times increased in intensity. Harold T. Wilkins, in his book Flying Saucers Uncensored, mentions an unnamed correspondent who wrote him of information he had got from a lady in the neighbourhood. Worried by the strange underground noises she heard, she had sought explanations from the local authorities. She was told they had none. The noises did not come from road work or pumping operations or factory machinery. Examinations of victims by a London specialist have disposed of the noises in the head theory. Wilkins' correspondent added, "One difficulty is that only certain people hear the sounds. I myself could hear only a very faint throbbing, and on the afternoon I called, Mrs. Craig told me it was not anywhere near as loud as it can be. She has very acute hearing, as also has the other lady, Mrs. Fielding. The mysterious sound is not high-pitched. Mrs. Craig describes it as resembling the sound of giant wheels turning." After a very long time, the humming eventually ceased at Chalfont, St Giles, without the cause ever being located. Some years later, it started up again in the London area. The Evening Standard for Thursday, 5 December 1963, reported a mysterious humming sound that was causing people to be unable to sleep in a block of flats at Southfields. The residents blamed generators in the LCC, as it then was, supplies depot nearby, but the LCC denied that there are any generators in the building. The mystery was further accentuated by another report of people living about a mile away in the Upper Richmond Road, Putney, who were having sleepless nights due to a humming sound. Then in the mid-1960s, many people in Kent, including, I recall, Mrs. Eilette Hyams, wife of author Edward Hyams, heard the hum, which persisted for such a long period that some residents were unable to put up with it any longer and actually moved from the area. On 18th of June 1972, the Sunday Express printed a long news story about the hum, which was now bothering the residents of Bournemouth. Whatever causes the hum seems to like a spot of travel. Here's an extract from the newspaper report. A mysterious high-pitched hum is plaguing people who live near Bournemouth. They say it is wearing down their nerves and alarms them even more because usually other members of their families cannot hear it. One victim, Mr. Paul Wallace, 59-year-old translator, said everyone who hears the noise agrees it's like having a dynamo in the head. It's a ringing hum, a vibration which is very painful. It gives me headaches and migraine and I can never get a good night's sleep because of it. Earplugs seem to make it worse. The newspaper went on to report that Mr. Wallace was so desperate after hearing the noise for 5 years that he had spent nearly 2,000 quid of his savings to pay an expert to find out what is causing the hum. Now what does it all mean? Local authorities, electrical companies, the Army, the Air Force, local factories, Uncle Tom Cobley and all deny being the cause of the hated hum. These humming sounds seem to come from somewhere underground. A fantastic idea occurs to me. Could it be that the inner Earth people are reactivating some of the Atlantean tunnel systems? Chapter 25, The Puma Mystery. Over the centuries, many strange and scientifically unacceptable animals, monsters, ape men and other weird creatures have appeared and been seen by large numbers of people all over the world. There's an interesting parallel here with the UFOs, which have also been seen throughout history. During the last quarter of a century, the number of sightings and encounters with these grotesque creatures has steadily increased. The number of UFO sightings and encounters with their occupants has also escalated over the same period to a fantastic degree. Many ufologists now seriously consider that there is a link between the two phenomena. Probably the creature best known to the general public as the Yeti, more popularly known as the Abominable Snowman. Usually the Yeti gave off a horrible smell, which is the reason for the nickname. This creature has been seen in China, the Soviet Union and Tibet. And just to add a little bit of Australiana to it, we also have them here and we call them not Yetis. Yowies. We call them Yowies, and they are quite well known in this region. They vary in size from some 3 feet to 10 feet or more, and the giant ones are covered in black hair and have long arms. The well-known American ufologist and writer John A. Keel tells of similar creatures in the United States and how the Indians asserted that such creatures were ejected from the moons which landed periodically in the valley. Keel pointed out that many UFOs have been seen flying over Yeti-infested areas in the Himalayas. In Canada, a similar creature to the Yeti has been seen frequently and is known as the Sasquatch, an Indian name. In the United States, the creatures are known as Bigfoot, and frequent in particular the states of California and Oregon. Apart from these Yeti-type creatures being seen in different parts of the world, there have been reported a number of unusual cat-like animals which seem to have a definite connection with the UFOs. For many years, accounts have appeared in the British press of mystery pumas that have been seen in England by farmers, police officers and other good folk. Reports of these elusive animals are not confirmed only to England. In fact, a veritable rash of them have been seen and encountered both in the United States and Ireland. And yes, I can also personally confirm many people have reported them in Australia. Not myself personally, I've never seen one. Many UFOs have been reported in the areas and around the same time that the pumas have been seen. Once again, there appears to be a strong link between the two phenomena. Incidentally, there is now an active organisation in England called the Puma Research Group. They've established a good liaison with the Hampshire Police and interview witnesses that cite pumas. Their secretary, Mr. Saris Francis, confirms that many of these puma sightings do occur during periods when there is UFO activity in a particular area. Some years ago, Charles Bowen, the editor of Flying Saucer Review, wrote a full-length article in his magazine called Mystery Animals, which tends to illustrate the point made of a connection with UFOs. One of the cases discussed by Mr. Bowen was that of farm manager Edward Blanks, who had reported to the police that one of his steers had been savaged. Bowen went to see him at Bushy Lee's farm and found the farmer a very down-to-earth type. The puma had been around the farm for about 2 years, and both Mr. and Mrs. Blanks, as well as their son, had caught sight of it at night. Mr. Blanks told Bowen that it was his custom to make the rounds of his farm before retiring for the night. On 2 occasions, he suddenly became aware of a mysterious light on the roofs of the farm buildings. The light moved from roof to roof, yet he could not see the beam which produced the light. It was certainly not produced by car headlights from the Odiham Road. The local topography precluded that possibility. Mr. Blanks could not trace the source of the light, and he was puzzled by the phenomenon, because on each occasion the mystery puma arrived on the scene shortly afterwards. I just thought I might quickly mention that my family property out at Bathurst, western New South Wales, when I was young, my cousin, who I don't see how he had any reason to make this up, he claimed he saw a puma one evening. Like he basically called it a cat, but he said it was so big, it was like bigger than a dog, and then we sort of went, sounds like one of them pumas. It's also a famous Yowie territory as well, so, and yes, I have seen a Yowie in the far distance, but I haven't seen a puma. But got a cousin with credible reason not to make up bullshit who reckons he saw one. A very interesting case was reported on 6th of July 1966. Here it is from the London Times. Puma is seen stalking a rabbit. From our correspondent, Guildford, July 4. The elusive puma that has been roaming the Surrey-Hampshire border for 3 years came out in the open today and was watched and followed by police, post office engineers and villagers for more than 20 minutes. The last shred of doubt among the police about its existence disappeared when it stalked and killed a rabbit in full view of a police inspector. It appeared today in a meadow adjoining the home of the Queen's cousin, the Reverend Andrew Elphinstone, at Walpoleston, near Guildford, and among the first to see was Inspector Eric Bourne, aged 55, of the Special Constabulary, who watched from his garden only 100 yards away. Inspector Bourne said tonight that a post office engineer working 20 yards away yelled, "Look at that puma!" I went to where he was standing, and sure enough, without any doubt whatsoever, there was the puma. I watched it come out of the copse and along the side of the meadow, keeping to the cover of the hedge, to within 100 yards of the bottom of my garden. Then it lay down out of sight. It was ginger brown colour and the size of a Labrador dog. Cat-like face. I rang the police. Just as they arrived, it got up and sauntered back at a leisurely pace to the copse as I watched through field glasses. I don't know whether it saw us watching, but it was in no hurry as it went into Mr. Elphinstone's copse and disappeared. We went over to where it had lain in the grass and found a half-eaten rabbit. A motorcycle patrol officer, Police Constable Robin Young, said, "The animal was in sight for 20 minutes and there was no doubt that it was the puma. It was ginger-coloured and had a long tail with a white tip and a cat-like face. It was just walking casually around the meadow. I had a good look at it through binoculars from 60 yards away. One of the villagers there had a shotgun and took a pot shot, then the animal took off. We followed it for about half a mile and then lost it when it reached the road." There have been many other puma sightings, both before and since the Times account just related. These have been reported in both the press and in Flying Saucer Review. These mystery cats have also been encountered in Ireland, the Soviet Union and the USA. It is true that the mountain lion is indigenous to certain mountain areas in the United States, but these puma-like animals have been seen many times in that country far from the natural habitat of the mountain lion. UFO researchers will recall the famous Socorro, New Mexico landing on 24th April 1964 involving police officer Lonnie Zamora. Numerous oval-shaped or cut-like paw markings were found around the scorched area where the UFO had landed. Two American ufologists, Jerome Clark and Lauren Coleman, wrote a two-part article in the US magazine, Fate, called On the Trail of Pumas, Panthers and ULAs, Unidentified Leaping Animals. The writers described many puma sightings. However, they brought out the interesting point that cat-like animals have often been seen in connection with UFO flaps. Even the 1896-97 UFO flap in the USA coincided with the appearance of these mystery animals. The fact is, it's not just in England that the puma phenomena seem to coincide with UFO activity. Charles Bowen ended his article, Mystery Animals, mentioned earlier, by asking, where do these animals come from? Certainly not zoos and circuses, for no such losses have been reported. It seems highly unlikely that a number of private persons have had cheetahs and pumas as domestic pets which they cannot report as lost because they smuggled them into the country in the first place. So I repeat, where do they come from and what is their purpose? Where do they come from? Although the puma is not indigenous to England, it certainly is to the planet. If there is a connection with the UFO phenomena, which seems highly probable from the evidence available, then it does not seem logical for these animals to be flown here across millions of miles from some other planet or planets. In any case, the evolution of animal life on other planets may have taken quite a different course from that on Earth. The puma, it should be emphasised, is indigenous to this planet. A strong case has been advocated in this book for the existence of a hollow Earth and for the UFOs coming into our atmosphere from entrances in the polar areas. Therefore, it seems much more likely that the UFO nauts, for reasons best known to themselves, are landing pumas and perhaps other creatures on different parts of the Earth's surface from the interior of the Earth. As I say, I don't necessarily agree with any of this, but I'm just reading it for informational purposes. Why are inner Earth people surfacing? Chapter 26. UFOs have been reported throughout history, generally speaking. These are spasmodic events. However, nearer to our own times, there was a big flap of cigar-shaped objects over the USA in 1897, and two more flaps, one over Britain in 1909 and another over New Zealand later the same year. It may have been a coincidence, but when the bomb was let off over Japan in 1945, the UFOs really began to get around and have been seen since by millions of people all over the world. In a magazine article some years ago, I suggested that as a result of our nuclear activity, a chain reaction might be set off affecting other solar systems in the galaxy, and that was the reason for the sudden influx of UFOs in our atmosphere. In short, that these spacecraft were coming from other planets and solar systems to observe what was going on here. Shortly afterwards, my good friend, Senor Antonio Ribera, a leading Spanish ufologist, took me to task for suggesting that our nuclear activity could upset the equilibrium of the galaxy. He pointed out that the galaxy has withstood much worse cataclysms than our comparatively puny nuclear explosions. For example, the explosion of the supernova which created the Crab Nebula and the 15 novae seen with the naked eye since 1900. He emphasised that these were explosions in a very real sense, but did not cause the galaxy to lose its balance. It is much nearer home that the reason will be found for the UFO's suddenly increased appearances after the bomb was detonated. The people most concerned, apart from ourselves, would be those living inside the Earth. They might well be perturbed by our underground explosions and indeed by radioactive fallout from our overhead explosions entering their tunnels. If inner Earth people have a technology far more advanced than our own, then they certainly would know of the danger nuclear activity on the surface could bring them. I've already referred to von Daniken's theory that the giant tunnels under Ecuador and Peru were built as vast shelters in which to take refuge in case of attack from outer space. His theory could equally well be applied to all the other Cyclopean tunnels mentioned in this book around the world. Earlier too, reference has been made to the thunderbolts thrown by Zeus and the other gods, and of the other death-dealing weapons. It is more than likely that the Atlanteans had something akin or even more lethal than nuclear weapons at their disposal. So when we started our nuclear explosions in 1945 and onward, the inhabitants of the inner Earth, knowing what could become of our activities in this direction, may well have been alarmed. Over and over again, contactees have been given messages from mankind by flying saucer pilots telling us to stop nuclear activity. It is well worth repeating the question: if it is not visitors from outer space that are worried about our nuclear activity, then who would be most concerned about it? The answer undoubtedly points to those people that live under the surface of this planet. It is appreciated that a great deal of the material in the second part of this book reads like incidents out of a James Bond thriller. The men in black, the foreign-looking men that suddenly appear at UFO landing sites, and the secretive nocturnal visits of flying saucers unloading pumas in isolated country districts. It all seems to add up to some undercover military operation. Indeed, for a long time now, most ufologists have accepted that UFOs based near the Earth, very few have dared to suggest inside it, are potentially hostile. This viewpoint is based upon the secretive and evasive actions of the UFOs and their occupants. In my previous books, the Sky People have always been presented as friendly towards humanity. This I still believe. The real Sky People will be discussed later. The majority of UFOs seen in our atmosphere come from an area pertaining to our planet. That is now the accepted view of most leading ufologists. It is those particular UFOs that are regarded with some suspicion. The descendants of the original people that went inside the Earth may look reasonably like us. It could be that the surface of our planet has been gradually infiltrated by inner Earth people for some purpose. Keel mentioned that the late Dr. MacDonald had ideas on the same lines, though no doubt the Doctor may have considered the aliens to be coming from somewhere out in space. If there is any truth in this conjecture, then it would be most unlikely that these people would be coming from space, though it is quite conceivable that there is intelligent life in deep space, and that other planets have been seeded by some highly advanced civilization in the same way that our own planet was long, long ago. It is not really feasible that intelligent beings on other planets would have evolved in exactly the same way as human beings here. The people who would look most like us would be the people living inside the Earth. Some inner Earth people would have been living on the surface for some considerable time. When others are dropped here by UFOs, those inner Earth people already living here could meet them and provide the necessary papers. Keel has called this undercover activity Operation Trojan Horse, and in a remarkable book called that title has amplified the whole clandestine work as being directed by ultra-terrestrials. In his book he has done some splendid objective reporting of these undercover operations, but because many of the incidents include psychic overtones and the use of extrasensory perception, ESP, by the visitors, then according to Keel, and his view is shared by many ufologists, the phenomena must originate from ultra-terrestrials in an invisible universe. This idea, if the inner Earth is inhabited, is not necessarily valid. At the same time, it should not be discounted either. If the hollow Earth exists, then the interior must be a physical area like the surface of the planet. The inhabitants could be descendants of a race or races who originally lived on the surface and who built such amazing structures as the Gate of the Sun at Tiahuanaco, close to Lake Titicaca, 12,000 feet up in the high Andes on the borders of Peru and Bolivia. The platform of Baalbek to the northeast of Beirut in Lebanon, upon which the Romans much later built with 200-ton stones. Our present much vaunted civil... That doesn't make sense. Hyphenated. Civil Easter Island. Okay. Our present much vaunted civil Easter Island and the fortress of Szechuan in Peru, built with 200-ton stones. Our present much vaunted civilization would not build such edifices today. I think there's some poor editing happening by the printers here. The civilization existing on this planet before catastrophe struck must have been a spectacular one. The remains of its fantastic buildings in different parts of the world and the discovery of the Piri-Reis map prove it. It is highly probable that a civilization of that caliber would have been capable of constructing spacecraft of the types that we call UFOs. In addition to their technological and scientific ability, it is more than possible that ancient civilizations had developed paranormal powers and were capable of performing many feats that most people would term magical. Some people may scoff at this last suggestion, but remember that we live in a material age, especially those who live in the Western world. In India and Tibet, there are many yogis possessing similar abilities. H.T. Wilkins, in his book Flying Saucers Uncensored, included a letter from his friend Frederick G. Herr, an engineer and traveller, who was then residing at Santa Monica, California. Here's an extract from it. My opinion is that the saucers look for markers scattered all over the world in far past ages. Some of these markers must have grown dim. They are in straight lines and about 50 miles apart. One was found in Oregon when some guy set up an assay office over the spot and was nearly shot because his assays differed widely from those taken outside. No, I do not think that flying saucers are etheric. If they were, they would not be visible. I think they are totally shielded by a force field against mass and gravity. This may explain their brilliance and mathematical form and perfect finish. Others who have seen some of them at slow speed have noted a material formation with lack of this utter perfection. In my opinion, the saucers are leftovers from one of the Atlantean civilizations, and there may be a few from a Lemurian civilization. Too true. A race of people who went inside the Earth at the time of the Atlantean catastrophe may well be sending up the flying saucers that are seen in our skies. This, then, is the third choice which should be seriously considered by ufologists and every thinking person, in addition to the extraterrestrial theory and a vague, invisible area interpenetrating our planet, so much now in vogue. Interesting how people thought back in the day when they believed we lived on a planet. But it doesn't invalidate it in any way, shape or form either. It's still part to add to the puzzle, to contemplate, to meditate upon, and see where it goes. Chapter 27, is there a fifth column among us? Another disturbing phenomenon is the vast number of people that disappear every year. Some people make themselves scarce for the usual mundane reasons. For example, to escape from their wives or husbands, the taxman and the police. However, the majority disappear without a trace for no apparent reason at all. According to Keel, 100,000 people disappear in the USA every year. What have these disappearances to do with UFOs? The significant answer is that most of these disappearances take place during UFO flaps. It would appear that the UFO nauts have a very great knowledge of people on the surface of this planet and, in some cases, go to great trouble to take those with special qualifications that might be of use to them, even to the extent of rescuing such a person from drowning. Shit, I should go drown myself. Kidding. The following newspaper report appeared in the Listin Diario of 28 October 1972 and was included in an article by Salvador Freixedo called UFOs over the Caribbean, published in Flying Saucer Review Case Histories. It is 9 o'clock in the morning. On a deserted road near San Cristobal, a man appears and flags down a car. The driver, an insurance company director whom we shall call XX, slows down and pulls up. The man approaches. He is wearing a sort of light green overall with a shiny glint to it. The garment covers his feet. He is wearing no shoes, no gloves, and has no pockets, no weapons, no insignia. It is noted that he is wearing a sort of watch on his left wrist. This mysterious person asks XX, "Don't you know me?" "No," says XX. "My name is F-X. FM dash, says the man. This is the name of a person well known in Santo Domingo who appeared mysteriously in the sea about 15 years ago. The mystery visitor continues. It was thought that I was drowned along with 2 other people, but I was rescued by a modern machine. XX, by a helicopter? FM, no, supposedly a module, that is to say, what you folks call a UFO. I was rescued by these 2 people, he points towards 2 companions a certain distance away, because of my knowledge of radio techniques and my intelligence. The 2 people mentioned are over 6 foot high, slim, and dressed in identical fashion to FM. Their hair is short and brown, and their skin is a light colour, like that of the Chinese. They remain silent, standing there with arms crossed, observing the scene. FM draws the attention of XX to the machine in which they have come. It is of the size of an automobile and has the shape of an American football, and its surface is nickeled. XX, what are they doing here? FM, supposedly investigating. XX, what sort of investigating? FM, investigating. XX, from where do they come? FM, supposedly from Venus. The stranger adds that they are greatly interested in the Milwaukee grave. Then FM says, step back, we are about to leave. The dialogue has lasted some 5 minutes. Just as the 3 individuals are about to depart, FM turns round and tells XX not to worry if his car won't start at once. He says everything will return to normality. Mr. Gordon Creighton, who translated Salvador Frixido's article for the magazine, commented in a footnote regarding the phrase La Fossa de Milwaukee. I confess that at first I was utterly stumped by this, but now, as a postscript, I can add that this is not a grave or archaeological relic in Milwaukee, USA, but the name of an ocean deep which is part of the Puerto Rico Trench. One fact sticks out like a sore thumb after studying this dialogue, and that is the general evasiveness of FM's replies. When FM is asked where the 3 men have come from, the reply is supposedly from Venus. The inference being that is where many ufologists think the UFOs originate. However, he does not directly answer the question. Then, when FM is asked what they are doing there, the reply is supposedly investigating. When pressed to be more specific, the answer is investigating. It is true that FM adds they are interested in the Milwaukee grave, though that could well be a red herring. What really intrigues one is why FM, who was a native of this planet, now behaves in such an evasive and secretive manner. It is almost as though he had been brainwashed. Another staggering thought arises from the case of FM. We will, one fine day, discover that thousands of the people who have disappeared from the face of the earth are now living inside the planet, brainwashed by some hypnotic machine and subservient to their new masters. Perhaps the people who disappear or are abducted after being brainwashed are sent back to the surface with special work to do for the inner earth people. During the Second World War, the term fifth column was used for any organisation in a country that was actively assisting the enemy. There may be an active fifth column already here among us. Interesting. 1999, which I guess upside down would be 666. Chapter 28. Let's take a breather. Okay. No doubt some people will consider that a gloomy and perhaps sinister picture has been painted in the second part of this book. Maybe they are right. However, there are many strange facets to the UFO story. It is neither scientific nor honest to sweep certain reports and facts under the carpet. This subject cannot be looked at through rose-coloured spectacles. Possibly the bizarre happenings described in the last few chapters are all illusory, though they are well documented. Maybe there are no mysterious men in black, and all the UFO researchers who have been silenced were just paranoid. Perhaps the Yeti, the Sasquatch, the Bigfoot, and the Surrey Hampshire puma don't exist. After all, police officers are human just like us. Maybe they made a mistake in stating the puma was real. However, these cat-like animals have been seen by police officers in the USA too, and it is well verified that these animals appeared during UFO flaps. Yes, it all certainly does add up to a disturbing picture. However, the early classical writers stated that the abode of the gods was in the centre of the earth, and that this was a paradise indeed. Therefore, you must pay your penny and take your choice as to whether the inhabitants of the interior of the earth are for or against us. We live today in a time of increasing turbulence and violence. Hijackings, kidnappings, and skullduggery are commonplace occurrences reported daily in our newspapers. In an article written some time ago, I likened the state of this planet to an empty ink bottle. Some occultists and mystics believe that invisible energies are pouring in on us which have a strange effect. They make those that are inclined to do violence more violent, and those that are slanted towards a spiritual way of life more spiritual. If you like, this process could be called the sorting of the wheat from the chaff. Let us continue with the analogy of the ink bottle. When you pour in fresh water, all the dirty mark lying at the bottom of the bottle rises to the top, and a similar situation is occurring right now on this planet. The muck, that is, the violence, the increase in crime, the drug scene, the permissive society and political scandals, all of which are part and parcel of this picture. It is my belief that this planet, like the ink bottle in this analogy, will suddenly become cleansed and all the muck will disappear. Then we may see the reappearance of the real sky people who have been waiting in the wings before venturing once again onto the Earth's stage. Keel has pointed out that 666, the mark of the beast, inverted becomes 999. According to biblical prophecy, the beast has to be loosened first. Prophecy is a very dubious business. However, in Operation Earth, reference was made to Nostradamus, who is more bullseyes to his credit than any other seer. Michel de Nostradame, known as Nostradamus, was friend and advisor to Queen Catherine de Medici. He wrote his predictions down in more than 900 quatrains. There is a particularly well-known one about an event to take place in 1999. In the year 1999 and 7 months, from the skies shall come an alarmingly powerful king, to raise again the great king of the Jacquerie, Jacquerie, Jacquerie. Before and after, Mars will reign at will. Now, the French word Jacquerie is one that is most in common usage before and during the time of Nostradamus. The word means peasants or the common people as a whole. Here's a quote from Operation Earth. Actually, now that I know what Jacquerie means, I'll just read it again. In the year 1999 and 7 months, from the skies shall come an alarmingly powerful king, to raise again the great king of the Jacquerie. Before and after, Mars shall reign at will. So here's the quote from Operation Earth. Now the choice of words in this quatrain is extremely interesting. Nostradamus does not say that a great king of the Jacquerie will be set up or instigated. He states quite clearly that the powerful king from the skies shall come to raise again the great king of the Jacquerie. In short, there's already been one or more before, and this office is going to be resurrected or reinstated. Now, readers of an earlier book, Men Among Mankind, will be familiar with the dual system of rulership that was in being with the inhabitants of Earth. We're in open contact with sky people aeons ago. There was an off-planet ruler who was the priest king or divine ruler, and also a secular ruler from our own planet who looked after administration and day-to-day affairs here. When the sky people left after the sinking of Atlantis, this dual system was carried on symbolically in ancient Egypt until the time of Menes. This prediction by Nostradamus that the alarmingly powerful king from the skies is going to raise again the king of the Jacquerie is a clear indication that the sky people upon their return are going once more to reintroduce this dual system of rulership. It would seem that although the Earth has a very difficult time to go through for some years ahead, the long-term future looks better. That is, if we go along with Nostradamus, but comfort can be taken from the knowledge that he was the most successful of all seers into the future. The human race may one day welcome members of what Sir Fred Hoyle has referred to as the Galactic Telephone Directory. Furthermore, our descendants may enjoy wonders beyond our wildest dreams and journey to the stars. Okay, well, I will have a little pause there for a second. That kind of blew my mind a little bit when I started thinking back. Hang on. My daughter was born in 96. My son in 97. What would have happened in 99? And I had my moment of enlightenment and felt myself leave my body for an extremely long time. I just went, wow. That kind of hit a bit of a raw nerve there for a sec. Wow. Chapter 29, a military operation. There are many indications that most of the flying saucers come from inside the Earth, and that a large, well-planned operation is being carried out by the UFO nauts. Earlier, it was stated that the UFOs during the last 25 years have been dropping earthly substances on our soil. That is, aluminium, silicon, magnesium, calcium and other chemicals. Why they should drop all this material is not at all clear, but like everything else in this jigsaw puzzle, there is probably a very good reason for it. Maybe they regard the surface of our planet as a suitable place to drop their garbage. Seriously though, the fact that they are leaving behind earthly substances is another pointer that their origin is not in outer space. Then, an account has been given of the mysterious humming sounds which have been heard for long periods, in some instances lasting several years, coming from underground, and these noises may well have something to do with the activities of inner Earth people. Let us now summarise the strange undercover operations of the UFO-nauts. Firstly, there are the foreign-looking men who dress like us, who turn up at a UFO landing site, often before eyewitnesses have had time to report the incident. You'll recall that in the second part of this book, when discussing the launching of the early satellites, it was explained that personnel would be waiting at the calculated spot worked out by technicians to pick up the nose cones. It is highly likely that most UFO landings are planned beforehand. Therefore, it would be quite conceivable for the inner Earth people to have representatives here on the surface. Some of these would be at the landing spot at a pre-arranged time. A number of subsurface people have probably been living on the surface for years. Indeed, they may have had spies among us for thousands of years. Howard T. Wilkins, in Flying Saucers Uncensored, wrote, "My query is, have the sources terrestrial spies and contacts? I conclude that they have. Fantastic as it sounds, one might speculate whether they have been, and still be, something in the nature of a secret society which, in the last 5 or 6 centuries, may have established such contacts and maintained them to this day. The fact that these representatives turn up at many landing sites is indicative of a well-planned big operation. It is true that these strange men have not always been seen on such occasions, but perhaps UFO-nauts are allowed sometimes to make a spot landing for some other motive. Secondly, consider the men in black who frightened Bender into closing down his organisation. They have silenced, harassed and threatened many other UFO researchers throughout the world. Who are these mysterious men in black? The answer to that one is that they are the equivalent of intelligence operatives from the inner world. Every so often they call on some UFO researcher who's got too close to the truth. It is interesting that they always dress in black, which is the colour of the dark or negative forces. Incidentally, clergymen wear black clothes too. Now, I wonder, what is the reason for that? Anyway, the men in black are another part of the big undercover operation. Thirdly, there is the landing of pumas and possibly other creatures in various countries. These pumas have been landed at night, and it is a well-attested fact that sightings of them have coincided with UFO flaps in the same areas. Pumas are not indigenous to some of the countries in which they have been seen. For example, England and Ireland are not their natural habitats. They are, however, indigenous to our planets and not necessarily to another world. Therefore, the Earth being hollow, with a very likely a subtropical temperature, it is reasonable to assume that this is where these out-of-place pumas originated. Another fantastic but perfectly feasible idea has just made its way through my little grey cells. In an earlier chapter, the brainwashing of surface people was suggested. Perhaps the inner Earth people, with the aid of their hypnotic machines, could program the pumas to do a job of work on the surface. Now, that really is an idea. Not so crazy when you think about it. Possibly the first thing to do would be to establish a considerable rapport with the puma. Well, we have made a fair amount of progress in communicating with the dolphin. Then, with the aid of the machines, the animals could be programmed for whatever work is required. In short, the puma would be landed from a UFO under the cover of darkness, go about its programmed business, and at an arranged time the UFO would return at night and pick up the waiting animal. Some readers may consider the idea of pumas being programmed for special work as too fanciful. However, as the Daily Telegraph reported in the issue of 1 February 1974 at a symposium organised by the British Small Animals Veterinary Association, this very idea was highlighted by Dr. Boris Levinson, Professor of Psychology at Touro College, New York, a specialist on relations between human beings and animals. Later, at his London hotel, Dr. Levinson told the newspaper's reporter that it is only a question of time before small electrodes can be put into every part of an animal's brains to make them do anything. Fourthly, the idea was broached that people from the inner Earth might be infiltrating and taking over responsible posts in some of our governmental and military departments. In particular, Keel mentioned Dr. James McDonald's view that alien visitors were actually doing this. Apparently, Dr. MacDonald considered that people from outer space were infiltrating into these responsible posts, but it seems much more likely that inner Earth people, who know everything about us and resemble surface people, would be more suitable candidates than extraterrestrials. This could also have been going on for a very long time. In fact, it would make it much easier for them to take over us when the time is right, all part of the big operation. Fifthly, the idea of a fifth column operating on the surface of our planet was discussed. In support of this suggestion, there is the case of FM, who was rescued from drowning by the UFOnauts. You will recall FM was wanted by them because of his intelligence and knowledge of radio techniques. Now he is working for them. Then, linking up with this last example, there's the vast number of people who disappear off the surface of our planet every year. Some disappear for obvious reasons, but a very large number just go for no apparent motive and leave no trace. It is my belief that many of these missing people have been abducted and taken to the inner world. The inner Earth people are taking away large numbers of our world population, brainwashing and programming them to work for them, either on the surface or in the interior of the Earth. This is a very big part of the operation. The clandestine UFO activity and landings at night show that these craft are coming for some secret purpose. Surely, if these people in the UFOs were some invisible psychic realm, then there would be no need for them to use spacecraft at all, especially when all this UFO activity takes place at night, which indicates a desire not to be seen. It would seem that all these bizarre and sinister actions are leading up to some big event. The manner in which they have been carried out is reminiscent of a military operation. We're getting close now. Chapter 30 is called Climax. I think I'd better finish some beer. Before I reach the climax. Pardon me. The Bible tells us something interesting about inner Earth people coming to the surface of the planet. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon, saying to the sixth angel which had the trumpet, Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. Revelation 9, 11, 14. In the first part of this book, it was stated that according to Greek mythology, traditionally Hades had four rivers flowing through it. These were the Styx, the Acheron, the Phlegeton, and the Cocytus. I assume that's how you pronounce that. Cocytus. Cocytus. It would seem from the verses quoted from Revelation that despite the fact that there is a river Euphrates on the surface of our planet, references is being made to another one inside the Earth. Palmer commented about the meaning of these two verses as follows. The Euphrates is one of the four great rivers which flows out of Eden. If we look at the globe, we will find that the oceans are parted into four major sections by land masses surrounding the pole. Since the other three rivers mentioned in Genesis as emerging from Eden, Pison, Gihon, and Hiddekel, author, have never been found, and the Euphrates of today has failed to give us a clue as to the location of Eden through lack of the other rivers. Might we conclude that the four angels are to be loosed from a river inside the earth under the domination of Abaddon? Indeed, the succeeding verses in the same chapter of Revelation relate of a veritable army coming forth against us. Jess Stern, in his book, The Door to the Future, wrote, It is interesting to note that both Gene Dixon and the late Edgar Casey have predicted a threat to America through the Davis Strait, that little-travelled passage between Greenland and the mainland of North America, from which an over-the-pole attack could conceivably be launched. I don't know why it should be, Mrs. Dixon remarked, but that is a vulnerable area. Perhaps this is warning to the wise. The late Edgar Casey and Mrs. Gene Dixon will probably go down in history as two of the most successful seers of modern times. It is likely that both of them saw a slant-eyed race coming from the north and concluded that the threat was from China. In another part of Stern's book, Mrs. Dixon mentions China as the potential enemy. A noteworthy point is that both the Eskimo and the Chinese are slant-eyed peoples, and both have legends of coming out of the earth in the long and distant past. There are also many stories of inner earth people having slanted eyes. This may well have something to do with living in that particular environment. In this book, it has been shown that the UFOnauts are carrying out some strange operations on the surface of our planet. Most ufologists are of the opinion that the majority of the UFOnauts should be considered as potentially hostile. This opinion is based upon a study of UFO landings, nocturnal activity, and the general deceitfulness, evasiveness, and trickery of the UFOnauts themselves, combined with their obvious desire not to be seen on certain occasions. Many people today think there will be shortly a final confrontation between the forces of good and evil. There is no doubt at all that we are approaching a climax in the history of mankind. The tempo of life is moving too fast. Something will have to slow it up and bring the world back to reality. That something could be a conflict between the inner Earth and surface people for the ownership of this planet. If that happened, it would unite all the countries of this troubled world as never before in one common cause. Where have we heard that before? There was a postscript. Yeah, it's an interesting theory. And of course, people writing interesting theories have often been predictive programming. I tend to think that what's really changing is our awakening to the reality that it's not a planet at all. That it's a stationary plane, and yeah, there may well be vast underground chambers and unidentified flying objects coming from them, but they're all terrestrial. All physical beings can only exist on the physical plane. My personal opinion, which I just thought I'd chuck in there for the hell of it. Postscript, chapter 31. It's a PS, or a postscript. The closing weeks of 1973, I was 2 years old at the time, have seen a tremendous UFO flap in the United States, coupled with many sightings around the world. This is probably the biggest ever rash of UFO activity that has occurred to date and may be heralding some big event. There have been both sighting and landing reports on a vast scale, as well as much activity from our charming Men in Black. The UFOs have recently been seen by people in all walks of life, including police officers, and for good measure by no less a person than the Governor of the state of Ohio, Mr. John Gilligan. 4 men in a US Army helicopter encountered a UFO on Thursday, 18th of October. The commander of the copter, Captain Larry Coyne, reported that the UFO was heading for them at a speed of 600 miles per hour. Coyne took immediate evasive action and put the helicopter in a sudden dive. And a most startling thing happened. The UFO, travelling at a speed of 600 miles per hour, suddenly slowed to 100 miles per hour, just like that, which was the speed of the helicopter, and hovered at about 500 feet above them. After a few seconds, the UFO turned and went off at a great speed. Captain Coyne then set about pulling the helicopter out of its dive. It was then that the startled crew discovered one of the most freakish aspects of the episode. At the moment the UFO had swooped overhead, the helicopter was at an altitude of 1,500 and going down. Now, seconds later, it was 3,800 feet high in the air. This was a complete impossibility for the machine to do of its own accord. On 29th of November 1973, BBC Radio 4 reported that half the Americans interviewed in a Gallup poll, 51%, regarded unidentified flying objects as real and not imaginary. This is a fantastic increase on the previous poll. Parallel with the tremendous increase of believers in UFOs, there was a growing interest in paranormal subjects, that is, telepathy and various aspects of what is called extrasensory perception, such as clairaudience, telekinesis, clairvoyance, and astrology, among others. There is an unfortunate side to this growth. In the United States, and to a lesser extent in the United Kingdom, there has been a corresponding increase of both interest and participation in witchcraft, black magic, and the activities of vampires. All this, of course, is on the negative side of the coin. Perhaps I should not have mentioned witchcraft in this connection, as the real wizards and witches were and are working positively. However, they would be the first to admit that a lot of phonies and undesirables have got on their particular bandwagon and are practicing black magic arts, bringing the old witchcraft into disrepute. I would suggest that this influence comes from inside the earth and emanates from Saturnaku's caverns. In previous books I've pointed out that each and every one of us is responsible for our own destiny, but I must qualify that by pointing out that it is very easy for the inner earth people with their machines and advanced powers of ESP to influence us on the surface. I know that this is a very controversial suggestion, but I believe it to be true. This is in the days before we even had mobile telephones. Gwen towers. However, those that know how to protect themselves through higher spiritual understanding are not influenced by these evil forces, but many weak-minded people are easy prey to what Shaver calls the Deros. Let me give an example of the growing interest in paranormal subjects. The Daily Telegraph, Colour magazine, dated 30th November and 7th December 73 respectively, carried several articles in both issues on the human aura, the undefined sixth sense, astrology, faith healing, ESP, and a feature on the amazing Uri Geller. Millions of people either saw the young Israeli on television, heard him on radio, or have read about his feats in the press. Now, I must be one of the odd men out in this day and age, as I do not have a television set. However, so many of my friends who watch Geller on TV told me not only of the most extraordinary demonstration of psychokinetic abilities on the screen, but also of strange things happening in their own homes. I would like to quote an extract from a recent communication from a friend of mine, Mrs. Marilyn Preston, who happens to be a remarkable healer and lives at Saltash in Cornwall. She wrote, "In a recent television program with David Dimbleby, in his talk-in series, we watched as the impossible happened, and how Uri's thoughts were able to attune to some power, which resulted in not only cutlery bending and breaking in the studio, but also, as on the Jimmy Young Show, of similar things happening in homes all over the country at that same instant. Reports from many parts of the country poured in to say watches and clocks had stopped, or broken ones had suddenly started. Spoons and knives were bending and curling in amazed folks' homes, and police in some counties contacted the BBC to report unnatural happenings." What Uri Geller was demonstrating in a most effective manner was what we should all be able to do quite naturally. Due to our material civilization, the rat race, and our present sophisticated way of living, our extrasensory powers, latent in us all, have got completely atrophied. Today we rely so much on material techniques. For example, the telephone, the cable service, telex, and of course, the spoken and written word for communication purposes. So telepathy, the facility of transferring thoughts and messages from one person to another over short or long distances, has become a lost gift. I think that Uri Geller, with demonstrations of his fantastic mental abilities, has given people, both here and in America, something akin to a traumatic shock. In fact, he has done more to shake people out of their mental lethargy than to make them think than the churches have done over the last few centuries. Scientists are absolutely baffled by Uri's abilities, but are so interested in his performances that they want to test him under laboratory conditions. Both the Max Planck Institute in Munich, Germany, and the Stanford Research Institute in California have set up experiments to test Uri's psychic and telepathic abilities. Some of these tests have already been undertaken, and the Israeli has emerged with flying colours. There have, of course, always been people with remarkable spiritual and mental powers in this world. Uri has stated that he is not a magician in the usual sense of the word. He claims that his abilities come from God. Well, God power is latent in all of us, but as stated earlier, this has fallen into disuse, and only lip service is paid to our source. Uri Geller is possibly an example of what Teilhard de Chardin called the ultra-human that is now emerging on our planet. There are others, but the difference is that Uri has demonstrated his abilities on television both here and in the United States. He is telling us really that we can do those things too, just as a great teacher 2,000 years ago said, "What I can do, you can do." Now, don't get me wrong, Uri does not pretend to be the Christ or anything like that. He is just demonstrating the powers that the teacher told us were our heritage. We must not forget too that the evil forces can use the same powers for negative purposes, and this is being done today. Biblical prophecy tells us that the Antichrist will arrive and rule the world before the Christ returns. Satanaku's forces are still inside the earth. If you accept Richard S. Shaver's stories, then they are already manipulating our thoughts, causing wars, assassinations, crimes, and all sorts of skullduggery on the surface. Many assassins have said afterwards that God told them to stab someone. There are many other examples of this nature. The old machines of Atlantis are still there inside the earth, intact and indestructible. They have apparatus that can see through solid rock. This is not impossible, as our own scientists are getting towards this ability themselves with the aid of lasers and other remarkable discoveries. It is my firm view that the groundwork has now been prepared for a takeover of this planet by those who live inside it. A great deal has already been accomplished. They have their representatives here, many in high places. Then, the Antichrist, Satanaku, long prophesied, will rule the world, the whole planet, both inside and on the surface, until Armageddon. It is my belief, and once again according to biblical prophecy, which has never been wrong, that eventually Christ will return with his angels, who are the real sky people. Meanwhile, please ponder over whether our natural spaceship, the planet Earth, is hollow and inhabited. I've given you proof that it is. If the answer to these questions in your own mind is in the affirmative, then this must surely be the secret of the ages. Interesting stuff. I like his take. Personal statement from the author. The theme of this book is very unusual. Therefore, it is only right that I should state that the ideas and views expressed are my own, and not necessarily those of Contact International, a worldwide movement of which I have the honour to be president, nor of the British UFO Research Association, who have kindly made me one of their vice presidents. And then there's just references at the end. Well, that's that book. If I have anything to say about that, yes. Christ is coming. He may already be here. You never know.